Hello everyone, I am Claudia Morales with the Music Division, and today I am in conversation with American singer, songwriter, composer, bandleader, and playwright Somi Kakoma, mostly known as Somi. Somi, welcome to the library.
Thank you, Claudia.
It's so great to have you here.
It's wonderful to be here.
So before we sat down, we had a chance to enjoy some materials from 3 different displays. What did you see and what caught your eye the most?
Oh, wow, what caught my eye? They were so widely different, but one thing I truly appreciated was the fact that there's just been this intention around like these different parts of me in terms of my interests. I can't say I loved one more than the other, but of course the archive, you know, there are so many stories that show up in the viewer when you're looking at them. At least that's my experience. And I would say the first one, being able to think about South African music because I've been so inside of Miriam Makeba's legacy and voice, you know, for the last 10 or so years, multidisciplinary project around her voice. So it's always wonderful when you have that opportunity to contextualize it. Yeah. It wasn't actually her music, but to understand that these recordings were happening around that time when she was so young. But also the absence of her voice was particularly striking, right? And it kind of tracks with the ways in which she's been erased from the larger kind of global cultural imaginary, specifically in the United States. So that was quite fascinating to know that there isn't much of her voice and presence here. But I was really touched by the Africa collection as well. The Rwanda and Uganda materials, just the consideration of that to think about my own heritage, because that is so much what guides my own work as an artist. And to see that work and to know that there's to see those materials and know that there's, you know, more that I can actually learn even about my own. I noticed the kingdoms that were there, and my mom is from that clan, and so to see that available to dig into is quite exciting. And of course the music and theater as well, you know, to see these women and their interiority, these very personal letters. That's always really special, right? Because it gives you a glimpse of their humanity and beyond their celebrity. So that was particularly moving. I love seeing things like that, and just to hear their voice and to think about the contexts in which they were living is really quite special.
As you said, you have a Rwandan and Ugandan background. You grew up in Illinois. And can you share with us a little bit of that Somi, the child, growing up in this family? Sure. How was that?
Wow, how was that? Well, I am one of 7 kids, so huge African family.
What is your place?
I'm 6.
You're 6, okay.
I have a younger brother. I'm the youngest girl. So yeah, I mean, huge African family. My father was a professor. My mom is a retired nurse now. And you know, the one thing I always say about the gift of my parents, one of the greatest gifts is, you know, you'd be hard pressed to find an African family that's like African immigrants who are like, yes, go and be an artist. I'm the only professional artist out of all of the crew of Kakomas, and so I always think about the fact that they never said no. They encouraged a certain type of exploration. They put me in, you know, they let me take my creative writing classes and put me in creative writing camps and music camp. And I played the cello from the time I was about 8 through university. So I'm grateful for that. But I think that they initially were like, this is going to help her be well-rounded. She loves these things. You know, thinking that I would, you know, be a doctor or something.
Are they musical?
Actually, my mother is an incredible voice. She's an incredible keeper of West African folk songs, and actually just a lot of music from her like youth, you know, 60s, 50s, 60s. So she's the person who always has a song, you know, available on, you know, when you say a phrase, she always seems to have a song to like ground the moment. But so she taught me so much about heritage from that area, the area we're looking at in Uganda, that western part of Uganda. My father was not a musician, but one time he said to me that he always loved the idea of that he wishes that he had learned the piano at some point in his life. He was a great scientist. And interestingly, I always assumed I got my music from my mother's side. Just there's so much music in that side of my family. My grandfather was a reverend, and so he grew up in the church with all of this music, similar to what we were talking about earlier, the South African music. There's just the tradition that comes out of that, and along with the cultural traditions of Africa as well. So we are a songful family. But I didn't experience that from my dad's side. In fact, he was quite quiet. So, but then his eldest sister had an extraordinary voice, which I did not know until in my adult years. And I was like, oh, maybe it's from that side too.
Do you grow up in church?
Yes, I did. The reason I say yes is because, so my grandfather was an Episcopalian, an Anglican reverend. And so when we came to the States, we were in Episcopalian and even Lutheran contexts. And so it's a very different experience from the capital church. B black church, right? Yeah. It's a very white space, really. And so very different experience. And I did sing in those communities and in church growing up, but I don't reference it as like, this is where the music was from that. Even though the songfulness of my family was very much about these hymns in vernacular, these sort of like church songs from Uganda. That's the way I would identify growing up in the church, but really in a very private kind of family space. Yeah.
So you're here tonight for a concert.
Yes.
At the Coolidge Auditorium.
Yes.
We are so excited.
Thank you.
And you are playing music from your most recent album.
Yes.
That centers around Mera Makeba. What is your relationship with her, and what made you focus your energy around her?
So that last record, initially I kind of just wanted to think about what would it be to reimagine her music in a modern jazz context. And once I started reading about, I wanted to understand like what was she performing at what point in her life. You know, she had a 60-year catalog, right, of recordings. And so then it's like, what are the songs I'm actually going to engage and try to tackle and reconsider, reimagine. And then once I started looking at like what she was doing at different points in her life and what she was singing, I realized there was so much about her life that I actually didn't know, which was a bit of a surprise, because as somebody who grew up in an African family with parents of her generation, or who grew up listening to her, right? I was surprised. You know, I was always familiar with Miriam Makeba and her voice. I don't remember the first time I encountered her song. I don't remember the first time I heard her voice. And so I was surprised at how much I didn't know. And once you understand her story, you understand more about the ways in which we have not remembered her. You know, she was such a huge she was a cultural force, right? She was the first African artist to show up on the global stage. And she was really an important figure in popular music here in the United States. So that's why I was surprised to find that there wasn't really much of her. There's a lot of reference to her. But at the same time, not surprised, because there was a kind of like blacklisting when she married Stokely Carmichael. So for me, this work is it's always about just trying to lift up her voice and her name so that people might consider the ways in which we should remember her, we should honor her, how much of an impact she made, not just on the continent, not just as an activist, single-handedly in many ways, bringing visibility to the anti-apartheid movement, bringing a global awareness of that struggle, and aligning it with civil rights movements, and being in community and best friends with Nina Simone, and knowing all of these, you know, being a part of that. So it makes sense that all of these people would talk about her influence, because she was doing something else, right, with her performances and her voice and her music, and asking people to consider a more nuanced understanding of what Black music might be, especially at that time. So for me, it's just about trying to honor her, remember her, speak her name into a room so that people are also encouraged to go and do the digging and hopefully bring her back to her rightful place in the ways in which we remember all the greats.
And you also had a very special celebration after she passed in New York. How
Yes.
did that happen?
Wow, you really did your research. So when she passed, I was performing in a little club in the East Village called Drome, and I got a phone call from a friend in the business, Brian Backus, and he said, I just wanted to let you know that Miriam Makeba has just passed away. I know you had a show tonight. And normally I wouldn't even answer the phone, but for some reason, this person always has like these magical things that when he speaks, something kind of, I don't know, serendipitous sort of shows up. So I had to go into the room and tell everyone what had just happened, the news I had just received, and we take a breath together and then try to carry on with the show. And then all I kept thinking about that night when I got home was like, well, who's going to remember her? Who's going to honor her? And this is long before my own research and my own, interrogation. This is, 2008, sorry. So I made a few calls. I started emailing a few presenters in New York. Of course, last minute, most people are booked so far in advance, but Le Poisson Rouge had just opened, and a promoter by the name of Bryce Rosenblum had just, he was like, sure, we can do something here. And then, I think the reality is all of these people showed up because everyone was looking for a space to honor her. And that's the thing that always is a bit profound. When I think back, it was the only memorial that took place in New York, which was astounding. So I made a few calls, and Harry Belafonte agreed to show up and eulogize her, not because I knew Baba Harry, but because I knew Randy Weston's band and they knew Harry Belafonte personally. So Randy agreed to come and performed and told stories about what it was for her and Dizzy Gillespie to be on the road. As I said, Harry Belafonte came and did this beautiful eulogy talking about what it was to discover her in her 20s. Paul Simon came and offered a short set and talked about what it was to tour Graceland with her, which actually in the 1980s is when she finally came back to the US after having been exiled in the 60s. So it was just and then just a range of young and older musicians from the continent and the diaspora. So it was a really kind of beautiful intergenerational remembering. And I always think about that moment as a kind of beginning of a dialogue with her voice, with her spirit, with her legacy, really. It was a very special night, yeah.
And years later, you decided to embark into the musical Dreaming Sensible, which also centers around her life.
Yeah.
How do you decide to change routes in a way? It's not necessarily, but in a way, enter into this new enterprise
of theater making. Well, so here's the thing. If we're to track the different kind of moments in this journey with her memory, that concert happened in 2008, and it wasn't until 2014 when I decided, you know what, let me write this. Let me try to make an album. And it's and that was partly inspired because someone who was in the room at the concert was like, Somi, there's still a need to tell her story, and I remember this event. And then, so 2014, I had just put out a record, and I decided, and I got a grant to explore this, to do the research. And then once I understood how much of her story I didn't know, I felt like the album wasn't enough. The album didn't have the multidimensional, range of her life story. Yes, I can be in a concert and say this, I can tell the stories of those songs, I can tell stories and anecdotes about her life, but what does it mean to then really truly understand her life, and hopefully in understanding that, get into the interiority of her life as well? The kind of, once you understand all she was carrying, you understand just how generous she was, because it was a lot. Besides being exiled, there were a lot of personal challenges that I did not know that she was carrying in many ways alone. And as a singer, as a woman, as an African, I can completely relate to understanding what it is to step outside of tradition, what it is to step outside of, and tradition not only as an African, but as a woman, to choose a path that's non-traditional. And there's a certain type of loneliness that can be, you know, that you can experience. So to know that she was carrying so much of these personal and kind of global things, but in such a deep and isolated way. I really wanted to lean into her interiority and hopefully offer a fuller story so that we can understand not just the pain, but to understand the generosity. Because when you think about Miriam Makeba, you think about a good time, right? You don't think about the trauma necessarily, right? And the pain of what it was to live in exile for 31 years and to speak on behalf of a people going through apartheid. So it really was that the understanding of her story that was like, oh, I need to lean into the larger thing, which was, to me, the next choice was theater. So I ended up working on the play and then coming back to finish the record, you know, then coming back to actually make the record, which I don't think it would have been the same album had I not then sat inside of that and gone through the kind of dramaturgical rigor of making that story, the world making of theater, you know, and trying to embody her life and voice.
In 2017, you released your second album, The Music of Salon Nigeria, Salon Lagos.
The Lagos Music Salon.
The Lagos Music Salon.
Yes.
And this is a project of 18 months, an immersive project.
Yes.
You in Nigeria for 18 months.
Yes.
Can you share about that experience?
Sure. That album came out almost exactly 10 years ago now. This a couple of months ago, it was exactly 10 years ago. I went there really... I was invited by a mentor of mine, my former advisor at NYU, to come and be an international teaching artist in residence at a university, like about 5 hours drive outside of Lagos. It was just a 7-week stretch of time. I was like, okay. And I got there and fell in love with the city, and I had been to Lagos before, but this was like an opportunity to really see how it felt. And it was on the other side of losing my father. And I was really grieving, you know, and there's something about when you lose someone that there's a certain type of sobering, what really matters, right? Like you don't have the capacity for frivolous things in a way. And so I just was looking for a new energy and new point of view. And my father was a proud Africanist, and I knew that he would, you know, love the idea of me moving to Nigeria, even if it was for a stretch of time. And I ended up staying there for almost 2 years. And I continue to have a deep relationship with Lagos and Nigeria even now in so many ways, creatively, artistically, and socially, personally.
Well, the continuation of that is your project. I mean, you are very curious. Seems like you are always touching here, touching there, learning here, communicating. And you have this project in Nigeria that you do an exhibition in an art, cultural, how would you describe it? Intervention.
Yes. So I'm really interested in like activating dormant cultural spaces because, you know, interesting to be here in this library with so much of an archive, to be able to look at letters and photographs and everybody knows how to handle them, what to touch, what not to touch. Unfortunately, we don't really have those practices in place on the continent. A lot of our kind of performing arts histories, as you know, are rooted in the archive, right? Like that's what we rely on. They're all ephemeral, right? And so one of the things that I found very challenging is, you know, going into these spaces and realizing that either things are in disrepair, or when I say these places, I'm talking about important cultural sites, you know, venues, theaters, and realizing a lot of these places that were so important in the middle of the century on the other side of African independence and Pan-Africanist movements that have now been, like, in many ways, I always say to be forgotten is different from not remembering, right? I think that people can remember if you say the name, but there's the way that it's not that we've forgotten, we just have allowed ourselves not to remember, not to hold these spaces, not to be the custodians of this heritage and these histories and these stories. So the project you're talking about was a multidisciplinary salon exhibition on Festac 1977 that is meant to honor the history of Festac, to invite people into that reflection of why don't we know more about Festac 1977? Why don't we know more about these large arts gatherings that were happening in the 50s, 60s, 70s, even 80s? The last major one was the one in 1977 in Nigeria. And so that work is really about what does it mean to show up in these spaces, reconstitute the archive, and then what actually happens when you perform in response to the archive. That particular event was also bringing Marilyn Nance, who was the official photographer of the United States delegation of Festac, and bringing her back to Lagos for the first time since 1977, and seeing these large-scale, larger-than-life photographs that she took at that time, and then being in the room as a performer. I was one of the performers, responding. I mean, I didn't realize I was responding, but I was performing and seeing this huge image of Miriam Makeba performing literally in a space that was down the street from where we were standing. There's something that actually happens in this, like there's a conversation that happens when you're looking at the archive and then you're performing, and it's sort of a response that's happening. I still haven't found the language to explain what that is, but it's very powerful. And I just think that these are the ways that we can invite contemporary generations and audiences to think about what these archives mean, the value, the importance of them, and what they can inspire in art today, in our lives, in our everyday lives, not even just as artists, but in our everyday lives. So, yeah, I mean, there's so much more I could say about that, but I feel like Lagos, Nigeria is one of the kind of cultural hotspots on the continent. And we already see in contemporary contexts how much of a cultural giant it continues to be. So, yeah, I'm always deeply inspired there and grateful to be able to do that work.
Is the exhibition still up?
No, it's
up and
not
running?
up. So my goal is that was the kind of first of a larger project that I'm sort of going around the continent and reactivating dormant cultural spaces and encountering the archive and thinking about the ways in which we need to not forget, the ways in which we need to be better custodians, the ways in which we might respond and house and uplift and circulate that archive and see how that shifts and inspires this generation.
Where are you going next?
It's still on the fence, but
you can tell me, nobody will know.
I'm still on the fence, but I'm leaning towards Addis in Ethiopia, Addis Ababa, and Dakar, Senegal. There are two spaces there that I'm really curious about. So we'll see.
And I'm curious to know the implementation. Do you have help from local organizations? How does it happen?
Well, the exhibition that you're mentioning in this project has been through the support of the Mellon Foundation, the Humanities in Place program that they have. And then once you're on the ground, the way a lot of these things happen, you start a project and then other partners kind of can come along. And that's exactly what happened in Lagos. And that's what I'm hoping I can continue to do there as well.
That is just unbelievable. That's amazing, because I know it's a huge lift. It's a very intense work.
Yes,
so
it is.
Congratulations on that.
Thank you. I'm not doing it alone. I have a team of people who support the vision on the ground. Yeah, thank you.
Along the conversation with your curiosity, you also have your own label and a boutique agency. Tell us about that. When did you start your organization?
Salon Africana I started in 2019, and actually it's through Salon Africana that I'm doing this work on the continent. This is actually, most of the work was initially about kind of inviting a certain type of intimacy and arts, heritage-centered art making through music and jazz-adjacent musics, bringing them into space here, because I felt like now that there's so much kind of popular jazz, African pop music that's like circulating, around the world, I felt like people were starting to lose sight. It was like we were falling into another layer of the monolith, right? I feel like for so many years, it was like people have a very monolithic understanding of what African music and cultural production might be for many years. And now that's sort of being challenged, but then people are in a way, perhaps because of streaming and playlists, you can just kind of hit play. There's a kind of laziness, I think, in terms of like what that discovery, like before streaming, it was like there's a process of discovering artists and then understanding where they're from and the context. So Salon Africana was really about, in many ways, it's related to the Lagos Music Salon in that this kind of intimacy that I had with the place, the intimacy I had with Lagos, these storytelling salons that I was hosting in Lagos while living there, that then evolved into an album. So it's like, what does that mean to use my platform in the United States, invite artists on the continent to come into space, to feel understood, to be able to share their story in a deeper context. So that's how it initially started. And then post-pandemic, I was just really interested in what does it mean to do this work also on the continent? I think there's so many things that are needed in the creative economy, particularly in the performing arts, on the continent. So what does it mean to hold space for those stories at home as well? And so it's an exciting time just to be able to begin to expand. And honestly, I can track all of this work to the inspiration from Miriam Makeba. That project is also kind of referred to, we refer to it as the Zenzi Futures Project, because thinking about her labor, right, and her community building and her kind of circulation on the continent and around the world. So I think a lot of times we're having these conversations about heritage and you think so much about the past, but it's also important to constantly be in conversation with the future that we're trying to build, you know? So anyhow, I hope I answered the question.
I like that. And there's a line that caught my eye in your bio that reads, in her heart of hearts, she is an East African Western girl who loves family, poetry, and freedom.
East African Midwestern.
Midwestern.
Yeah, not Western. I mean, I am Western.
Midwestern. And the reason why I asked that question is that I think people in the United States that have backgrounds from other cultures, we are always with one foot here, one foot there. And we live this duality that sometimes, I don't know, it's interesting to see perspective on how people manage that duality, which we all have to a certain extent.
Yeah, you know, I was having a conversation last week about, somebody was talking about the tension, and I used to always feel like I had to try to resolve the tension between the here and the there, and I remember my brother said to me, maybe the point isn't to resolve the tension, maybe it's to stand in it, you know, and he's right, you know, like to feel all of the things, to know that you're always reaching for that sense of wholeness. I think that's just the nature of being a child of immigrants. That's the nature of being someone who's lived in multiple places. That's the nature of being a musician who travels the world. So I'm grateful for the tension and the constant pursuit of wherever it leads me, you know, freedom.
Before we go, you are a Grammy nominee. You are a double NAACP winner twice. You have Duke Foundation honoree. How have these accolades helped you or propelled you in your career, if they have?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, obviously I'm always grateful when your peers acknowledge the work, you know, and that's in many ways what a lot of these acknowledgements, these awards are about, is a community of people who are seeing you. And I think, you know, similar to what we were saying earlier, and not just as women or African women, but like all artists are in many ways on a very individual journey, right? And so sometimes just to feel seen is, it's affirming and it's encouraging to help you keep going. I would say the Doris Duke Artist Award, because they really encourage a certain type of like, let's not just invest, don't go and just invest this award in your art. You can do that if you want, but do something for your future self, do something to take care of yourself, right? And so that was particularly transformative. I mean, yes, I'm grateful for the Grammy nomination. I'm grateful for the awards from NAACP. I'm grateful for all of that. And the visibility that affords the journey and myself. But I would say that a very transformative thing has been, you know, the financial generosity that from the Doris Duke Foundation. I mean, that can really change a life. It really definitely changed mine, and has allowed me to think about my future self and do things that, you know, most artists we're always like, what do I need to do for the work? What do I need to do for the work? You know, you keep making. And, but to have a bit of breath, I think that's what it gave me. It gave me some breath to think about things outside of working all the time, making all of the time, and to think about the life I want to make and around that as well.
And how do you see your future self?
How do I see my future self? That's a beautiful question. Hopefully, grounded and not stressed. You know, I think you see a lot of artists who feel like they have to keep working. We tour all of the time. I want to just be in a position where I can say, okay, I'll come and sing a bit and then chill out. Or maybe I'll just want to perform all the time. I don't know.
You want to have the option.
I want to have the option.
Yeah, I like that.
I want to have the option. I want to have peace, you know? And I want to be able to help others, like help my family in whatever way and help my community in whatever way and teach. Really, that's
wonderful.
Yeah.
We all want to have options, right?
Yes,
that's the best case scenario. Somi, thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
We're looking forward to tonight's performance.
Thank you. I am too.
And for the ones watching from home, see you later.
See you later.